The morning room of Whitmore House smelled of jasmine perfume and quiet cruelty. Seren Whitmore stood beside the window, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture straight as a blade. She had learned years ago that stillness was armor, that silence could be a shield, that a daughter who made herself small enough might escape her mother's notice entirely. She was 24 years old, and she had perfected the art of invisibility within her own home. Not that it always worked. "Stand where I can see you properly," Vespera Whitmore commanded from her position on the velvet settee. She did not look up from the letter she was reading. She never needed to look up. Her voice alone could cut through stone. Seren moved 3 steps to the left, positioning herself in her mother's peripheral vision. Close enough to respond instantly. Far enough to avoid drawing criticism for hovering. The delicate dance of survival. Vespera was 52 years old and still strikingly beautiful. The kind of beauty that had opened doors and ruined lives in equal measure. Her dark hair showed no gray. Her pale blue eyes held no warmth. She had married well, buried her husband within 6 years, and spent the subsequent decade molding her household into a monument to her own comfort. Her younger daughter, Honoria, was the treasure. Golden-haired, sweet-tempered, destined for a brilliant match. Seren was the afterthought, the plain one, the one with her dead father's stubborn jaw and unfortunate habit of reading books instead of practicing pianoforte. "There's to be a dinner party this evening," Vespera announced, finally setting down her letter. "Lord Aldworth has accepted our invitation." Serene's stomach clenched. Crispin Aldworth. She had met him twice before, and both times his gaze had lingered on her in ways that made her skin crawl. "How pleasant," Seren managed. "You will wear the gray silk, the one with the high neckline." Vespera's eyes swept over her elder daughter with clinical assessment. "And you will be agreeable." Agreeable. The word her mother used when she meant compliant, voiceless, grateful for any scrap of attention. "Yes, Mother." Vespera smiled, and something in that smile made Serene's blood run cold. She didn't yet know why. But by evening, she would understand that her mother had been planning this moment for months, and that agreeable was no longer enough. Her mother wanted something far more permanent. The dinner party was suffocating. 12 guests crowded the dining room, their laughter too loud, and their wine flowing too freely. Seren sat at the far end of the table, positioned deliberately beside Crispin Aldworth, while Honoria sparkled at her mother's side, entertaining a young viscount with practiced charm. Lord Aldworth was 53 years old. He had buried 2 wives. Rumors whispered about the circumstances of both deaths, though nothing had ever been proven. He was wealthy beyond measure, politically connected, and possessed of appetites that polite society preferred not to discuss. He was also watching Seren with undisguised hunger. "You're very quiet, Miss Whitmore." His voice was cultured, pleasant even. The voice of a man who had learned to mask his true nature beneath layers of civility. "I prefer listening to speaking, my lord." "How refreshing." "My late wife talked incessantly." He leaned closer, and Seren caught the scent of wine and something sour beneath it. "I find quiet women far more manageable." She wanted to flee. She wanted to overturn the table and run until her lungs burned. But she could feel her mother's gaze from across the room, sharp as broken glass. Agreeable. Be agreeable. After dinner, the guests retired to the drawing room. Seren attempted to slip away to the library, her usual refuge, but her mother intercepted her at the door. "Come with me." Vespera's fingers closed around Seren's wrist like a manacle. "There's something we must discuss, privately." She was led to her father's old study, unused since his death, except when Vespera wanted privacy for unpleasant conversations. The room smelled of dust and forgotten memories. Lord Aldworth was already waiting inside. Serene's heart stopped. "Sit down," Vespera instructed, releasing her wrist with a small push toward the chair facing Aldworth. "Lord Aldworth has made a most generous offer, and you will listen carefully." "An offer?" "For your hand." Vespera's smile was triumphant. "He's willing to overlook your lack of dowry, your plain features, and your regrettable age. He sees potential in you that, frankly, I never have. You should be grateful." The room tilted. Serene gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. "Mother, the settlement is extraordinarily generous," Vespera continued, as if Serene hadn't spoken. "He'll provide for Honoria's season next year. He'll clear the remaining debts your father so inconsiderately left us, and in exchange, you'll become Lady Aldworth within the month." Within the month. Serene looked at Crispin Aldworth, at the satisfied curve of his lips, the possessive gleam in his watery eyes. This was a man who collected things, who broke things, who had buried 2 wives and was shopping for a 3rd, and her mother was selling her to him. "I won't." The words emerged before she could stop them. "I refuse." The slap came without warning. Vespera's hand connected with Serene's cheek so hard that her vision blurred. She tasted copper, heard ringing in her ears. "You don't refuse." Her mother's voice was ice. "You have never had that right. You've been a burden since the day you were born, eating my food, wearing clothes I paid for, and taking up space that could have gone to a daughter worth loving. This is the first useful thing you will ever do for this family, and you will do it." Serene stared at her mother, at this woman who had borne her, raised her, and apparently despised her for 24 years, without ever revealing the full depth of that hatred. Until now. "The banns will be read Sunday," Lord Aldworth said calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than purchasing a human being. "I'll send the carriage for you Friday week." Friday week. 11 days until her life ended. "Leave us," Vespera commanded. "Go to your room and stay there until you're fit to be seen. That mark on your face is unseemly." Serene rose on unsteady legs. She walked to the door with the careful precision of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. She made it to the entrance hall before she heard it. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel. At this hour, when all the dinner guests had been accounted for. Through the window, she saw it pull to a stop before the front steps, black lacquer gleaming in the moonlight, a crest on the door she didn't recognize, and stepping out of it, a figure in dark clothing who moved toward the house with purpose that seemed almost predatory. No one had announced another visitor. No one was expected. Yet somehow, Serene knew with absolute certainty that this stranger had come for her. The stranger entered without knocking. Serene watched from the shadows of the staircase as the butler stammered protests that died in his throat. The man simply walked past him, moving through the entrance hall as if he owned it, as if walls and doors and social conventions were minor inconveniences beneath his notice. He was tall, dark-haired, with features that might have been carved from marble, handsome in a severe way, like a storm was handsome before it destroyed everything in its path. But it was his eyes that arrested her, gray as winter skies, and utterly, completely silent in their assessment as they found her in the shadows. He knew she was there, had known before he'd even entered. Vespera appeared from the study, her composure flickering for the first time Serene had ever witnessed. "Your Grace." Her mother's voice held an unfamiliar note. Fear? Calculation? "We weren't expecting." "No." The single word cut through the air like a blade. His voice was low, unused, as if speech itself required effort. "You weren't. Your Grace. A duke." What was a duke doing in their crumbling townhouse at 10 o'clock in the evening? If this is about the Harrington matter, I can assure you it isn't. He hadn't looked at Vespera once. His attention remained fixed on Seren, on the shadows where she'd tried to make herself invisible. It wasn't working. Not with him. "Come here." 2 words, spoken to her, not her mother. Seren should have refused, should have fled upstairs and barricaded her door. But something in his gaze, not warmth, not kindness, but something that might have been recognition, pulled her forward. She descended the remaining stairs and stopped 6 feet away from him. Close enough to see a thin scar along his jaw. Close enough to smell rain and wood smoke and something darker. Older. He studied her face, the red mark where her mother had struck her. His expression didn't change, but something in those winter sky eyes turned to ice. From his coat, he withdrew a folded paper and held it toward her. Not to Vespera. To her. Seren took it with trembling fingers, unfolded it. The handwriting was bold and precise. "You have a choice. Stay here, marry Aldworth, survive what follows if you can, or leave with me now. Tonight. I offer protection, employment, safety, no debt, no obligation, no conditions you do not accept. Decide." She read it twice, 3 times. He was offering her escape. A stranger, a duke, a man who hadn't spoken more than a dozen words, but had somehow known about Aldworth, about the arrangement, about the fact that she needed saving. How? "This is outrageous." Vespera had recovered her composure, her voice sharp with indignation. "You cannot simply walk into my home and—" "I can." He still didn't look at her. "I have. Seren is betrothed. The arrangement is settled. No banns have been read." His voice remained flat, emotionless. "No contract signed. Nothing is settled. Lord Aldworth will do nothing." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Contempt, perhaps, or disgust. "I've ensured it." Seren looked between them, her mother trembling with fury. This silent stranger who had appeared like a dark angel with an impossible offer. "Why?" she heard herself ask. "Why would you help me?" He met her eyes, held them. And then he reached into his coat again, withdrew a second paper, and placed it in her hands. This one contained only 4 words. "Because I heard everything." He had been there, somewhere, listening. He had heard her mother sell her, heard her refusal, heard the slap. He had heard, and he had come. "Decide," he said again. "Now." Seren looked at her mother, at 24 years of silence and cruelty, and wondering why she had never been enough, at a future that held only Crispin Aldworth's cold hands and colder grave. Then she looked at the stranger, at the unknown, at the terrifying possibility of something other than this. She folded both papers carefully, slipped them into her pocket, and spoke the words that would change everything. "I'll get my coat." She didn't look back as she walked toward the door. She didn't see her mother's face contort with rage. She didn't hear the threats Vespera hurled at the Duke's impassive back. All she knew was that when she stepped outside into the cold night air, the stranger was beside her. His hand appeared at her elbow, not gripping, just present. Steadying. He helped her into the carriage, settled across from her in the darkness. The coach lurched forward, carrying her away from everything she'd ever known. She was alone with a man who barely spoke, traveling to a destination he hadn't named, for reasons he hadn't explained. She should have been terrified. And she was. But beneath the terror, something else flickered. Something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Hope. The carriage carried them through London's dark streets, and Seren Whitmore left her old life behind, without a single tear. She didn't yet know that her mother would come for her. She didn't yet know what the silent Duke had lost, or why he collected broken things. She only knew that for the first time in 24 years, someone had chosen to protect her. And that single act of unexpected mercy would change both their lives forever. They traveled for 3 hours through darkness. Seren didn't ask where they were going. The Duke didn't offer explanation. He sat across from her in the carriage, perfectly still, his gaze occasionally reflecting the passing lamplight before they left London, behind entirely. She studied him in stolen glances, the sharp planes of his face, the way he held himself like a man expecting attack from any direction. The scar on his jaw, thin and white, speaking of violence, survived. He caught her looking once, held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, withdrew a small notebook and pencil, wrote something, and handed it to her. "You may sleep. You're safe." 4 words, more than he'd spoken aloud since they'd left. "I couldn't possibly sleep," she said. "I don't even know your name." He took back the notebook, wrote again. Theron Vance, Duke of Greymere. Greymere. She'd heard the name before, whispered in drawing rooms with a mixture of fear and fascination. The reclusive Duke, the silent lord. The man who had withdrawn from society 7 years ago and never returned. Rumors claimed he was mad, that he'd killed someone, that his estate was haunted by the ghosts of those he'd wronged. Looking at him now, Seren didn't see madness. She saw something far more unsettling. Control. Absolute, iron-willed control. The kind that came from containing something powerful enough to be dangerous if released. "Why don't you speak?" she asked. "You can." "I heard you." He wrote. "Speaking costs more than silence. I choose when to pay." Cryptic. Frustrating. And somehow, strangely honest. She fell asleep despite herself, lulled by the rocking carriage and sheer exhaustion. When she woke, dawn was breaking over an estate that stole her breath. Greymere Hall rose from the mist like something from a fever dream. Gothic spires and ancient stone, sprawling across manicured grounds that seemed to stretch forever. Beautiful and forbidding in equal measure. The carriage stopped before massive oak doors that opened to reveal a woman in her 60s, iron gray hair pulled back severely, her expression suggesting she had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. "Your Grace." She curtsied to the Duke, then turned sharp eyes to Seren. "And this must be Miss Whitmore. Welcome to Greymere. I am Mrs. Blackett, the housekeeper." Seren stepped out on unsteady legs. "Thank you." You'll have questions, Mrs. Blackett interrupted, not unkindly. "They'll keep until you've eaten and rested. Follow me." The Duke was already walking away, disappearing through a side entrance without a backward glance. No farewell. No explanation of what came next. Simply gone. "Don't take offense," Mrs. Blackett said, observing Seren's expression. "His Grace isn't one for ceremonies, but he had your rooms prepared 3 days ago. The blue suite, warmest in the house. Whatever you need, you'll have." 3 days ago. He had known she would come, had been certain enough to prepare. How? What did he know about her? About her mother? About Aldworth? The questions burned, but exhaustion pulled stronger. She followed Mrs. Blackett through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, up a sweeping staircase, and into rooms more beautiful than any she'd ever occupied. "Rest," the housekeeper instructed. "Breakfast will be sent up. His Grace dines alone, but he's requested you join him for supper. 7 o'clock. Formal dress." He requested? Or commanded? Mrs. Blackett's lips twitched, almost a smile. With His Grace, there's rarely a difference, but you'll find he's not unreasonable, merely particular. She left Seren alone in the blue suite, surrounded by silk and mahogany, and the profound silence of a house that seemed to breathe secrets. Somewhere in this vast estate, the Duke of Greymere was keeping his own counsel. Whatever he wanted from her, whatever purpose lay behind his rescue, remained locked behind that stone-carved composure. She had escaped one cage. She could only pray she hadn't entered another. The first 3 days at Greymere passed in a strange rhythm of solitude and small discoveries. Seren saw the Duke rarely, glimpses across hallways, a figure walking the grounds at dawn when she couldn't sleep. Once she passed his study and heard the scratch of pen on paper, hours of writing for a man who wouldn't speak. But she found his notes everywhere. The first appeared on her breakfast tray the morning after her arrival. "The library is yours. Second floor, east wing. The collection is extensive." She went. It was magnificent. 3 stories of books, spiral staircases, reading alcoves tucked into window seats overlooking the misty grounds. She spent hours there, losing herself in volumes she'd only dreamed of owning. The second note appeared in a book she'd left on her nightstand. "If you prefer philosophy to novels, the restricted section is unlocked." Behind the green curtain, she found treatises on ethics, political theory, translations of ancient texts. Works her mother would have burned if she'd known Seren read them. The third note appeared beside a vase of flowers that materialized in her sitting room. White roses and blue hyacinths, her favorites since childhood. "Mrs. Blackett mentioned you seem tired of the yellow arrangements. I hope these suit better." How had he known? She hadn't mentioned flowers to anyone, had barely noticed the yellow lilies being replaced. But he had noticed. This silent, watchful man who seemed to observe everything while revealing nothing. On the 4th morning, she found him in the breakfast room. He sat alone at the head of a table built for 20, reading correspondence with his coffee untouched. He didn't look up when she entered, but he gestured to the chair at his right, closer than propriety demanded. An invitation. She sat, accepted the tea the footman poured, and waited. After a long moment, Theron pushed a folded paper toward her. "You've been here 4 days. You haven't asked about your position." "My position?" he wrote. "I offered employment. You accepted. We should discuss terms." Serene set down her teacup carefully. "I assumed that was merely pretense, a convenient excuse to remove me from my mother's house." Something flickered in his eyes. Not offense, almost approval. He wrote, "It was both, the excuse and the truth. I have need of assistance. You have need of purpose. The arrangement benefits us both." "What kind of assistance?" "Correspondence. My steward handles estate matters, but I receive other letters, requests for patronage. Social obligations I cannot ignore entirely. Political communications that require careful response. I need someone who can read between lines and write without sentiment." "You want me to be your secretary?" "I want someone intelligent enough to understand nuance and discreet enough to be trusted. You spent 24 years surviving your mother. You understand how to read people who hide their intentions." The observation was so accurate, it stole her breath. He had seen her, not as a burden or an afterthought, but as someone whose survival had required skill. "And if I refuse," he wrote, "you stay anyway. The offer of protection stands regardless, but employment gives you independence. Salary, not charity. Your decision. Your decision." The words he kept returning to, as if he understood that having agency taken was its own kind of violence. "What salary?" He named a figure that made her eyes widen. More than generous. Enough to accumulate independence. Enough that if she ever wanted to leave, she could. That's too much. It's appropriate for the work required. A pause. Then. "And for discretion about matters you may encounter." What matters? What secrets was he keeping that required such premium payment for silence? "I accept," she said, because whatever those secrets were, they couldn't be worse than Crispin Aldworth's cold hands reaching for her in the dark. Theron nodded once, finished his coffee, rose to leave. At the door, he paused, turned back, and spoke aloud for only the second time since their meeting. "Welcome to Greymere, Miss Whitmore." His voice was low and unused, but not unpleasant. The sound of it sent unexpected warmth through her chest. Then he was gone, leaving her with questions multiplying like stars appearing at dusk. That afternoon, she began work in the study adjoining his. The correspondence was exactly as he'd described, complex, politically sensitive, requiring careful navigation. She lost herself in it, grateful for purpose after years of enforced uselessness. But between the letters, she found herself watching the connecting door, listening for movement beyond it, wondering what had made the Duke of Greymere retreat from the world, and why, despite every rational instinct, she was beginning to want him to emerge from his silence. 2 weeks into her employment, the outside world arrived at Greymere's gates. "The Countess of Ashbridge," Mrs. Blackett announced with barely concealed disapproval. "She's insisted on waiting in the drawing room. Says she won't leave until His Grace receives her." Seren looked up from the letter she was drafting. "Who is she?" "His Grace's aunt, his mother's sister. She visits twice yearly to remind him of his failures." The housekeeper's lips thinned. "He won't see her alone. He'll require your presence." Before Seren could ask why, a note appeared on her desk, slid through the connecting door she hadn't seen open. "Come. Now. Bring your composure." She found Theron standing beside the fireplace in the main drawing room, his posture rigid, his expression carved from stone. Seated on the settee opposite was a woman in her 60s, dripping with jewels and self-importance. "Ah." The Countess's eyes swept over Seren with predatory interest. "This must be your new acquisition. Sit down, girl. Let me look at you." Seren glanced at Theron. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. She sat. The Countess circled her like a hawk examining prey. Plain, but not disastrously so. "Whitmore. Yes, I've heard of your family. Your mother is Vespera Harlow, that was, isn't she? We debuted the same year. Ambitious creature, even then. I don't claim responsibility for my mother's character, Lady Ashbridge." The Countess laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Spirit. How refreshing. Though it won't serve you here. My nephew collects strays, but never keeps them. Don't imagine you're special." "I don't imagine anything, my lady. I'm employed as His Grace's secretary. Nothing more." "Secretary." The word dripped with insinuation. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Theron moved, not dramatically, simply shifted his weight, but the Countess fell silent immediately. He handed Seren a note. "My aunt believes everyone shares her sordid imagination. She's mistaken. Please inform her that my household arrangements are not her concern." Seren read it, looked at the Countess, and delivered the message with perfect, pleasant calm. Lady Ashbridge's face mottled red. "You dare?" "I deliver His Grace's words accurately, my lady, as is my position." For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then the Countess laughed again, though this time with grudging respect. "Perhaps you're cleverer than you look, Miss Whitmore. Very well. I'll cease my inquiries about your arrangement." She turned to Theron. "But I didn't come to discuss your staff. I came about the Hartwell ball." Theron's expression didn't change, but Seren felt the temperature drop. "You must attend," the Countess pressed. 7 years is long enough for mourning. Parliament reconvenes next month. Your allies are questioning whether you're still capable of leading them. And the Aldworth situation." At that name, Theron's hands clenched. Just once, just briefly. But Seren noticed, and suddenly she understood something she hadn't before. Theron's intervention hadn't been random. He hadn't merely overheard her mother's cruelty and acted on impulse. He knew Crispin Aldworth, knew him, and despised him. "Requires your visible presence," the Countess continued. "People are talking. About the girl you took. About your absence. About whether you've finally gone completely mad. Show your face, Theron. Remind them who you are. The silence stretched unbearably. Then Theron wrote a note and handed it to Seren. Tell her I'll attend. 1 hour only. And Miss Whitmore accompanies me. Serene's heart stopped. Your Grace. He met her eyes. In his gaze, she read something unexpected. Not command, not expectation. A request. Possibly even a plea. I cannot do this alone. 4 words he hadn't written. 4 words she heard anyway. She turned to the Countess. His Grace will attend the Hartwell ball. I will accompany him. Lady Ashbridge's eyebrows rose. As his secretary? As his guest. The Countess studied her for a long moment. Then her lips curved into something almost resembling approval. Wear something appropriate, Miss Whitmore. The wolves will be circling, and they smell weakness from a mile away. After she left, Seren stood in the empty drawing room, trembling with delayed reaction. You want me to face society with you? She asked the silent Duke. Why? You know what they'll think, what they'll say about us. Theron moved closer, drew a paper from his coat, but instead of handing it to her, he pressed it into her palm, his fingers warm against her skin. She unfolded it with shaking hands. Because the wolves are already talking. Because Aldworth has told your mother where you are. Because in 3 days, Vespera Whitmore will arrive at Greymere demanding your return. The words blurred. The room spun. Her mother. Coming here. I cannot prevent her coming, the note continued. But I can ensure you're not alone when she does. The ball is 2 days before she arrives. Let society see us together. Let them see you're under my protection. Let your mother understand that you're no longer hers to sell. Seren looked up at him, at this strange, silent man who had saved her without knowing her and was now preparing to stand beside her against the woman who had broken her. Why? She whispered. Why do you care what happens to me? He took the paper back, wrote beneath his previous words. Because someone should have protected you long ago. Because no one did. And because I know what that feels like. His eyes held hers, full of pain he'd never spoken. And Seren realized, with sudden clarity, that the Duke of Greymere hadn't rescued a stranger. He had recognized a wound that matched his own. The Hartwell ball blazed with 1,000 candles. Seren stood at the entrance of the ballroom, her hand resting on Theron's arm, and felt every eye in the room turn toward them. The gown Mrs. Blackett had procured was sapphire silk, finer than anything she'd ever worn. She looked like she belonged here. She had never felt more like an imposter. Theron's hand covered hers briefly, a single press of warmth. Then he was guiding her forward into the glittering chaos. The whispers started immediately. Is that Greymere? After 7 years? Who is the woman? Not his wife. He never married. Whitmore, I heard. The plain one. Plain? Look at her now. And look at him looking at her. Seren kept her chin high and her expression serene. She had learned composure in a harder school than this. Drawing rooms full of gossips were nothing compared to her mother's breakfast table. But Theron was struggling. She felt it in the tension radiating from his arm, saw it in the way his jaw clenched tighter with every whispered speculation. He had been away from this world for 7 years, and returning clearly cost him something she couldn't name. Your Grace. A florid man materialized before them. Lord Hartwell. What an honor to have you grace our gathering. Theron inclined his head, said nothing. Lord Hartwell's smile faltered. And this must be your companion? Miss Seren Whitmore, she said smoothly. His Grace's secretary. He's asked me to assist with social obligations this evening. She guided Theron away before Hartwell could respond, found a relatively quiet alcove near the refreshment tables. You're doing well, she murmured. They're impressed you came. He withdrew his notebook, wrote quickly. You're doing the work. I'm merely present. Presence matters. You're reminding them you exist." Before she could say more, a voice cut through the crowd. Well, the hermit emerges. Crispin Aldworth materialized before them, his smile oily and triumphant. And with my intended bride no less. How delightfully scandalous. Seren felt ice flood her veins. Beside her, Theron went absolutely rigid. "I am not your bride," she said quietly. "I was never your bride. No contracts were signed." "Technicalities." Aldworth waved a dismissive hand. "Your mother made promises, accepted payment. In the eyes of many, you're already mine." His gaze traveled over her with proprietary contempt. "Though I admit, Greymere, you've polished her nicely." The sound Theron made wasn't quite human. Low, dangerous, a growl that vibrated through his chest and silenced every conversation within 20 feet. Then he spoke, aloud, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned ballroom. "Touch her. Speak of her. Look at her with those eyes again." Each word fell like a hammer blow. "And I will destroy everything you've built. Every alliance, every investment, every secret you've paid to keep buried. I know them all, Aldworth. Every single one." The silence was absolute. Aldworth's face had gone white. "You can't." "I can." Theron stepped forward, and Aldworth actually stumbled back. "I've been silent for 7 years, but I've been watching, listening, recording. Your dealings with the Harrington estate, your arrangements with certain establishments, the circumstances surrounding your wives' deaths." Seren watched the blood drain from Aldworth's face entirely. "Leave," Theron said. "Now. And if you ever approach Miss Whitmore again, everything I know becomes public record. Parliament, the courts, the newspapers." Aldworth fled. The whispers erupted like wildfire, but Seren barely heard them. She was staring at Theron, at this man who had been silent for 7 years, and had broken that silence to defend her. "You spoke," she whispered. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than pain in his gaze. She saw hope. "For you," he wrote, his hand trembling slightly. Words finally meant something again. The carriage ride home was silent, but it was a different silence than before. Charged, electric, full of things neither of them knew how to say. Seren sat across from Theron, watching moonlight play across his features. He had spoken tonight. Not just spoken, declared war on her behalf. "How long have you been watching Aldworth?" she asked finally. He withdrew his notebook. "Since he killed Marisol." The words stopped her heart. She was 17, engaged to him before I could intervene. Dead within a year. They called it a riding accident. I knew the truth. Seren closed her eyes. "Your sister was his first wife." "Yes. And you've been building a case against him ever since. Waiting for the right moment. Gathering evidence. When I learned he'd found another victim, I couldn't wait any longer." She opened her eyes. "You rescued me because of her. I rescued you because no one should suffer what she suffered." His writing grew more forceful. "But I kept you because of you. Your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to break even when breaking would have been easier." Tears burned behind her eyes. No one had ever seen her like this. "I've watched you these past weeks," he continued. "You're remarkable, Seren, not because you need saving, but because you save yourself with every decision you make. Theron, I know I'm not what you imagined. A silent, scarred man with a dead sister and more enemies than friends. I know this arrangement was meant to be temporary. I never said—" "You don't have to." He set down his pencil, met her eyes. "But I need you to know that if you chose to stay, not as an employee, not as a guest, I would give you everything I have. Every word I've hoarded for 7 years. Every silence that's been waiting for someone worth breaking it for." She couldn't breathe. You're asking me to stay? He shook his head slowly, then spoke aloud, his voice hoarse with emotion. I'm asking you to decide, whatever you want, whoever you want to become. I'll support it, whether that future includes me or not. He was offering her freedom. Real freedom. He was offering to let her go, if that's what she wanted. And in that moment, Seren realized she didn't want to go anywhere. What if I choose you? She whispered. His expression cracked, vulnerability bleeding through the iron control. Then I would spend every day trying to deserve that. She crossed the carriage, sat beside him, took his face in her hands, feeling the scar beneath her fingertips. You already deserve it, she said. You earned it the moment you walked into my mother's house and offered me something no one else ever had. What? Belief that I was worth saving. She kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was 7 years of his silence, and 24 years of her invisibility colliding in a single, desperate press of mouths and breath and hunger. His arms came around her, crushing her close, and she felt the sound he made, halfway between a groan and a sob, vibrate through her entire body. When they finally broke apart, gasping, he pressed his forehead to hers. Stay, he breathed. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you want to be. I'll stay, she promised, for as long as you'll have me. Forever, then. His voice cracked on the word. I'll have you forever. The carriage carried them home through the darkness, and Seren fell asleep against Theron's shoulder. She didn't know that her mother was already en route to Greymere. She didn't know that the hardest battle was still to come. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would face it with him beside her. Vespera Whitmore arrived at noon, 2 days later, in a hired carriage that looked shabby against Greymere's grandeur. Seren watched from the upstairs window as her mother emerged, adjusting her hat with practiced grace. She's here, she said quietly. Theron appeared beside her. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. Together, he said. One word. All that was needed. They descended to the entrance hall as Mrs. Blackett admitted the visitor. Vespera's eyes swept the magnificent space with naked avarice before landing on Seren. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise at seeing her eldest daughter dressed in silk and standing beside a duke. Then the familiar coldness settled into place. Seren. Her mother's voice dripped with false sweetness. I've been so worried, running off in the middle of the night without a word. I imagine they think I escaped a fate worse than death, Seren replied calmly, which is precisely what happened. Vespera's smile thinned. Such dramatics. Lord Aldworth was a perfectly suitable match. Lord Aldworth is a murderer, Theron said. His voice, still graveled from years of disuse, carried an authority that made Vespera flinch. That's a serious accusation, Your Grace. It's a serious truth, one I'll prove in court if necessary. Something shifted in Vespera's expression, the sweet mask cracking. I see. She redirected her attention to Seren. So, this is your plan. Warm the Duke's bed until he tires of you. The words should have hurt. Once they would have devastated her. Now, Seren merely smiled. You don't know me at all, Mother. You never bothered to learn. I know you're an ungrateful wretch. You sacrificed nothing. Serene's voice cut like glass. You sold my dowry when I was 14, used my inheritance to fund Honoria's wardrobe, told me daily that I was worthless. And when you finally found a buyer, you slapped me for daring to refuse. The words hung in the air, each one a blade. How dare you? I dare because I'm no longer afraid of you. Seren stepped forward, and her mother actually retreated. I spent 24 years trying to earn your love, but I was never the problem. You were. You insolent! Leave. Theron moved to stand at Seren's shoulder. Now. Vespera drew herself up. I am her mother. I have rights. You have nothing. His voice was devastating in its calm. No legal claim over an adult daughter. No social standing that can't be destroyed by what I know about your dealings with Aldworth. He withdrew a document from his coat, handed it to Vespera with cold precision. This is an accounting of every debt your husband left, every sale you made of your daughter's inheritance, every payment you accepted from Aldworth. It's all documented, ready for the courts if you ever approach Seren again. Vespera's hands shook as she scanned the papers. You can't prove. I can prove everything, and I will, publicly, unless you return to London, remain there, and never contact your daughter again. The silence stretched like a blade. Then Vespera crumbled. You don't understand, she whispered. Your father left us nothing but debts. I did what I had to. You had other paths, Seren said quietly. You could have told me the truth, asked for my help. But you didn't, because you never saw me as a daughter, only as a problem to be solved. Seren, goodbye, mother. She turned away, felt Theron's hand at her back, steadying and supporting. Behind her, she heard her mother's ragged breathing, the rustle of silk, the click of heels on marble growing fainter. Then gone. Seren stood in the entrance hall of Greymere and felt 24 years of chains fall away. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face. But beneath the grief and relief, something else was growing. Freedom. Real freedom. It's over, she whispered. Theron turned her to face him, cupped her face in his hands, kissed her forehead with impossible tenderness. It's over, he confirmed, and everything else is just beginning. That night, they sat together in the library, the fire crackling softly. Seren felt hollow, scraped clean, as if confronting her mother had emptied her of something she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten its weight. I thought I'd feel triumphant, she said quietly. I thought defeating her would feel like winning. What does it feel like instead? She considered. Sad. Not for her. She made her decisions. But for the little girl who spent years believing she was the problem. Theron set down his wine, moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. That girl survived, he said softly. She learned to read people. She learned silence as protection. Every strategy she developed kept her alive long enough to reach this moment. Tears slipped down her cheeks. You make it sound noble. Surviving isn't failing. It's the bravest thing anyone can do. He pressed her hands to his lips. And now, you get to decide what comes next. She looked at him, this man of silence and shadow who had somehow become her anchor. I choose you, she said. I choose this house that feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. I choose mornings in the library, and notes passed through connecting doors, and a future that looks nothing like the one I was trained to expect. His expression cracked open, vulnerability and hope bleeding through. You're certain? I'm not easy. The words still come hard, and the silences will always be part of who I am. I don't want someone comfortable. She slid from the chair to kneel with him. I want someone who sees me, who protected me before he knew me, and stayed beside me when he did. Seren, I love you. She said it clearly. Not because you saved me, because you were the first person who ever made me feel like I was worth knowing, worth keeping, worth fighting for. He pulled her into his arms. Marry me. The words were tender against her hair. Not as an arrangement. Not for protection. Because I love you, and I can't imagine any future worth having that doesn't include you. She pulled back just enough to see his face, the scar on his jaw, the eyes full of depths finally calming. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. When he kissed her, it tasted like coming home. They married 3 weeks later in Greymere's chapel, with Mrs. Blackett weeping into her handkerchief and the Countess of Ashbridge in the front pew, looking thoroughly satisfied. "I knew it," the Countess declared afterward, "the moment I saw how he looked at her." Serene smiled, her hand clasped in Theron's. "I thought you said he collected strays. Well, you were a stray. Now you're a duchess. Improvement all around." That evening, Seren stood in the Duchess's chambers, her chambers now, and watched the sunset paint the sky. Theron appeared in the connecting doorway. "Regrets?" he asked. She turned to face her husband. "Not a single one." He crossed to her, pulled a small box from his pocket. "A wedding gift." Inside lay a necklace, a delicate chain bearing a single sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Beautiful, and somehow familiar. "This was Marisol's," Theron said quietly. "Our mother gave it to her on her 17th birthday. After she died, I couldn't bear to look at it. But recently, I've been thinking." He lifted the necklace, clasped it around Seren's throat. "She would have loved you," he continued. "Your strength, your humor. If she had to die so that I would spend 7 years learning to wait and finally be ready when you needed saving." His voice cracked. "Then at least something good came from losing her." Seren touched the sapphire at her throat. "I'll wear it with honor," she promised. "And I'll make sure her memory lives in this house, in our children, if we're blessed with them." Theron pulled her close. "Our children," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." "Don't get too excited. We've only been married 12 hours. Plenty of time to practice then." She laughed. A real laugh, free and unguarded, and let him sweep her into his arms. The night that followed was tender and passionate, and everything she'd never dared hope for. She was the Duchess of Greymere, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. 5 years later, the nursery at Greymere rang with laughter. Seren stood in the doorway, watching her husband negotiate with their 4-year-old son, Marcus, while their 2-year-old daughter, Iris, dismantled a tower of wooden blocks. "We don't throw soldiers at Papa's head," Theron was saying with admirable patience. "You said a bad word," Marcus informed him solemnly. "I said, damn. That's not a bad word. It's an expression of frustration." "Mama says it's a bad word." Theron looked at Seren with exasperation. "Your son is a traitor. He's your son when he's stubborn." She crossed to rescue Iris from her demolished architecture. "How's your study surviving?" 3 ink spills. 1 overturned tea service. He gathered Marcus despite the boy's protests. "I've written more words in 5 years than in the previous 7 of silence." Seren laughed. She did that often now, laughed freely, without fear. "There was a letter from Honoria," she said. "She's asking if she might visit in spring." After Vespera's banishment, Honoria had written to Seren, tentatively at first, then with growing honesty. She had known nothing of their mother's cruelty until it became public. They weren't close, perhaps never would be. But they were trying. "Then invite her," Theron said. "You deserve family that actually acts like family." "I have family." She leaned into his embrace. "You, the children, Mrs. Blackett, even your aunt. We're quite the collection of strays." "We're home," she corrected. "Strays who found each other." Later, after the children were asleep, Seren and Theron sat together in the library. "Do you ever think about how it started?" Seren asked. The silent notes, the absolute absurdity of it all. "Every day," he pulled her closer. "I think about how easily I might have missed you, how grateful I am that I acted instead of simply observed. Words finally meant something. Because you made them mean something." He tipped her chin up. "You gave me a reason to speak again. To live again." Seren kissed him softly. "And you gave me a reason to be visible. To believe I was worth seeing. You always were. I know that now." She smiled against his lips. "Because you showed me." They sat together as the fire burned low. Tomorrow would bring the usual chaos: children's tantrums, estate business, letters requiring careful response. But tonight, there was only this: two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen, deliberately and daily, to walk together into the light. It wasn't the ending Seren had ever imagined. It was infinitely better, because the girl who had learned to disappear had finally found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved exactly what he found. And the man who had chosen silence had discovered that some words were worth breaking 7 years of quiet to speak. I love you. Stay. Forever. Some stories begin with lies and end with truth. Theirs was one of them. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey. If this story made your heart ache and sing in equal measure, please show your support by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing with fellow lovers of romance and redemption. Your support keeps our storytelling corner alive and thriving. Stay tuned. Another emotional tale is waiting for you. Click, listen, and let yourself be swept away once more. From all of us, thank you for being here.